Hi, my name is Cindy Rang with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington, and we're going to talk about backing fabric. All right, we're going to talk about math, but I promise to keep the math part down to just a couple of minutes. Brianna has warned me to not be too mathy. And so I'm not going to be mathy, I'm going to be visual, because there's a couple of things that I think that we need to talk about. We need to talk about how to figure out kind of how much you need if you're kind of doing it on the fly and you're ordering your fabric at 1 o'clock in the morning and there's no one to talk to. And then we also need to talk about the expense, the difference between clearance fabric for your backing, the perfect fabric for your backing, or extra wide fabric for your backing, so that you're making an informed decision. So first I'm going to get to the, bear with me, but the teeny tiny little mathy part. Okay, first let's talk about resource material. If you really want to zone out over the math part, I just want to suggest this particular reference tool. There's many reference tools on the market, and maybe you already have one, but I kind of like this one. There's a lot of information in it, including this on page 31 that talks about all of the backings, and if my quilt is this size, which layout do I need? And they went ahead and figured the whole thing for you. But sometimes I think that even having this graph, sometimes it's important for you to kind of know how to figure that out yourself. Okay, let's talk about the width of fabric. So let's just pretend for a moment on our screen that what we see is a basic width of fabric, piece of fabric. So we know that we typically, it's 42 wide, and then we can get whatever length we want. So if we have a relatively small quilt that is, say, 38 by, say, 60, then we can probably get 42 wide by 65 inches, and we have enough for our quilt. What you want to know is that if you're taking this to a long armor, they are typically going to want 4 to 6 inches on both sides and 4 to 6 inches on the top and the bottom. If something is teeny tiny, you could probably get away with less, but you'll want to talk with your long armor about that. So what's really nice is that if your quilt is relatively small, and let's say we're talking about 38 by 50, you could really go ahead and get a width of fabric piece and a 1.5 yards of fabric, and you don't have to do any piecing at all, and life is good. Okay, so let's say that we have a quilt top that is 60 inches by 70 inches. So what we know is that, again, if this is our width of fabric, so we've got 42 inches here, and we've got 42 inches here. If we were to sew these together with our seam allowance, what we have is we would have really a usable length of about 80 inches. So that's always a good thing to know, is that when we sew our width of fabric, we've got 80 inches. So whether we have 80 inches in length or if we have 80 inches in width, because of what we're doing, we know that when we sew it together, that's a key number to know. So here, if we do it this way, we've got 80 inches in length. Then for my quilt that is 60 by 70, I really need maybe 66 to 68 inches. So all I need is my 42. I need a 68 inch piece of fabric and a 68 inch piece of fabric, which is just under 4 yards. So kind of a key bit of math that I think is interesting to know is that for 4 yards of that perfect fabric that is in that collection that you really, really love at, maybe roughly $13 to $14 per yard, is going to cost you about $52. Wide backing, if you got something that was 108 inches, so there wouldn't be a seam here, it's 108 inches in length, a little bit more than you need, but you're only going to need 2 yards, it's going to cost you about $40. So it could be that there is a perfect wide backing, or for maybe about $10 to $12 more, you can get the exact backing you want. Or if you find a clearance fabric, you could probably save about another $8 to $10. It just sort of depends. Okay, so let's talk about a vertical seam. So a vertical seam, as I mentioned before, is going to give you a little bit longer length, if that's what you need. The other thing is that every once in a while, you're going to find a fabric that's directional. And even though maybe it's even a little bit smaller, but no matter what, you really want it to go up and down. So again, keeping in mind that by the time you've trimmed off your selvages and you sew this together, you've got your 42 and your 42. So no matter what, we've got about 80 inches wide. And then our length, if we've got a quilt that's say 72 by 90, this would be about the only way that you could do it.
That way what you're going to get is you want maybe 96 inches here and a 96-inch piece here. So if you're 42 by 96, this is a 2 2/3 yard piece of fabric. This is another 2 2/3 yard piece of fabric. Sew those together and your piece that you'll have will be roughly 82 by 96. So that's going to be 5 1/3 yards of fabric. And again, it sort of depends. Are you using clearance fabric? Are you using fabric that's on sale? Or are you using that perfect right off the shelf? It goes with the collection. If it's that perfect right off the shelf, goes with the collection, you're probably looking at roughly around $70 for this backing. But if you use an extra wide, you only need 2 1/4 yards. If you have 2 1/4 yards of fabric, and you've already got your 108, that's going to be $42. So it's a fairly significant savings. And so I just always suggest you kind of do that's why it's important for you to know and to do a little bit of math and just check and see if there is a wide backing that will work. The other thing too is every once in a while you have those great big huge king size quilts that you need to put 3 pieces on. So again, if we've got 42 by, let's say 108, we've got 3 yards of fabric here. We've got 42 by 108. We've got 3 yards of fabric here. 42 by 108, 3 yards of fabric here. By the time I sew these together with my 1/4 inch seam allowance, I've got 108 still by 120. So this is pretty massive, but it's 9 yards of fabric. So 9 yards of fabric, you're really looking at about $100. Unless again, maybe you can find, some clearance fabric that's absolutely perfect. But if you're doing an extra wide and you can find something that is 118 inches long for that really nice quilt, or 108 square, you're looking at 3 yards of fabric, which is on extra wide is probably going to be about $60. So there really can be a cost saving with that, as well as something that's kind of easy. So I'm going to show you one other thing. Now that we're done with the mathy part, that was it. That's all of the math we're going to talk about. Now I just want to show you a couple of things about extra wide backing. Okay, so hopefully your local quilt shop has a significant collection of extra wide fabrics. Here at the Fabric Patch, we have a lot of it. We tend to keep a lot in stock and on hand because we encourage you to finish your quilts. So a couple things we want to mention about extra wide fabric. One is that it is quilting quality fabric. It does have a little bit of a different finish on it. It probably has a little bit more starch. And sometimes that grain, it might not be 80 square, but it is definitely 60 square. So that means that if you have leftovers, if you've got that 20 inches at the bottom by 108 that you didn't need, you can go ahead and cut this up and put this in a quilt and use it up. It doesn't matter. You'll find that there are cottons and there are batiks and there are some really nice digital prints. Sometimes the price will vary just a little bit depending upon that, but it's generally an extremely good deal. The other thing that you want to know is on a typical extra wide bolt, there's usually only about 12 to 15 yards, which means that if there's something that you see that you like, there's probably only 3 to 4 people that will be able to get this bolt. So I tend to buy it when I see it, when I know that that's exactly the one that I want. So the other thing that we like to mention is that typically people will tear their backings. We always do. I don't say everybody always does because I have seen people who don't, but I'm going to suggest that you do, because what happens is this is double folded on the bolt. And so in order for us to lay this flat on the cutting mat and cut off a 2-yard chunk for you, it's possible that it will be really uneven, almost like, an hourglass with that little dog leg going on. So we always rip it. That way we know for sure when your long armor or when you go to pin it onto your machine, your top, your salvage bottom, and of course your sides are going to be perfectly even. We always like to mention that because when somebody gets their fabric in the mail from us, of course it's going to have that kind of funny looking edge. We always make sure that we have a couple extra inches there because there is a little bit of stress on that when we rip it, but it's really the only way to ensure that you have everything that you need for your backing and it fits on there perfectly. So we always rip it. All right, I think that's about it. I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear about how to kind of figure out what you need, how to do the math. If it's an issue of economics or color or size, we're always here also to help you figure out the math that you need for your backing. And if you have any questions, check in with us or your local quilt shop. Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.